well as the Harrier GR7s you just heard about, 2 Royal Air Force TriStar tanker aircraft and 3 E-3D Sentry early warning aircraft were flying essential support missions last night. And I think at this stage, I'd like to pay tribute to all the men and women of the Royal Air Force ground crews and support services who have been involved in these operations. They're carrying out very difficult roles in an exemplary manner. Turning to NATO's military action overall, our attacks so far have had to be aimed mainly at Yugoslavia's air defense system, since we have an obligation to protect our own aircraft. But the balance is now shifting to wider military targets. We're, however, still some way away from achieving our objective of reducing the capability of Yugoslavian security forces to repress the Kosovo population. Even now, Yugoslavian military and security forces, including tanks and other armored vehicles, continue operations using disproportionate force in northeastern Kosovo. There are reports of fighting around Podijevo in Shala region and in the vicinity of Victern. Our reports indicate that fresh forces have been introduced from Serbia and are supporting these offensives. I'm intent on ensuring adequate protection for our people based in Macedonia and Bosnia. They're not involved in Operation Allied Force, but they're there for peacekeeping purposes only. They're there to implement a peace agreement once one exists. We continue to take deliberate measures to ensure the protection of these forces. Yesterday, following reports that the Yugoslavian army might be tempted to shell our positions, our AS-90 long-range artillery was moved in Macedonia to be able to respond in full measure in self-defense to any Yugoslav offensive operations. We've also adjusted the position of our lead armored battle group with its Challenger tanks and Warrior armored vehicles to respond to any attack. These are purely defensive measures. Should there be an attack upon our forces, our response will be swift and severe and would not be confined to these steps alone.
Yes, in central Yugoslavia, just to the north of the border of Kosovo, and what we're seeing here is the explosion on the first one. We're seeing here 2 explosions in effect. One is the laser-guided bombs, and the second is the weapons inside, probably man-portable missiles going off there. So that's a very, very precise attack.
Right, we're going to have a look at that one again. We haven't organised the second one yet, but it's a kind of double explosion.
Yes, it is. The first explosion being the bombs, the secondary explosion being the weapons. You can see here, there's the plume of the explosion, so bright that the thermal imaging camera on the Harrier actually just swaps one sort of colour for the other in order to protect the camera system. But you can see there, right down in the bottom there, that's the secondary explosion going off. This plume here is of the laser-guided bomb. So that's a very successful operation. 2 targets in the same barracks complex. They called it a complex area, target complex were destroyed. The third one, they had a lock on, but there's a technical problem, what's called a hang-up in pilot terminology, and they didn't drop the bomb. So 2 out of the 3 targets of last night for the RAF destroyed.
Yes, I can hear the engine roaring, and the first one now is lumbering its way along this runway here, one of the longest runways in Europe. With its cruise missiles on board and a full load of fuel, it will take some time to rise off the ground.
Well, Andrew, quite a sight.
Yes, that's the first one away there. These aircraft have the call signal Havoc, and each individual plane has a name. Some of the planes here today, one called Instigator, another one called Mad Bolshevik. And yes, it looks as if another plane now is lining up. It's difficult for me to see the end of the runway from where I am. Another of our cameras is in a higher position, but yes, there is another plane coming along too. They try and take off as close as they can to each other so that they can travel in a squadron towards their targets. These planes could reach Serbia directly in 2 or 3 hours, but it seems they're flying a circuitous route over the Mediterranean, taking much longer to reach their target.
And Andrew, as we were discussing earlier, seeing these planes taking off the day before yesterday was the first sign that air attacks were about to strike, but as yet we don't know exactly their destination today.
No, we don't know their destinations. The US Air Force won't confirm until after the mission has been completed whether they were on a bombing mission or not. Certainly we would anticipate that they've been armed with cruise missiles. We anticipate they're going on a bombing mission. They will probably be launching these missiles later on this afternoon, this evening. They will probably hit home just as darkness falls over their targets in Serbia and Kosovo. And the third and final plane now taking off.
Right, well, we'll leave it there for now, Andrew. We've watched those 3 B-52s joining presumably the 4 who had, or which had left earlier on this morning. For now, thanks very much.
In either combat or supporting roles. We have conducted some 400 sorties, and here is a list of some of the air defence facilities that we have struck to date.
That may be somewhat microscopic for the people at the back, but we'll give you those afterwards.
You will see from the map the rough aim points by the places where those targets lie. And in many cases, there may be several aim points associated with these important installations. I will also show you some filmed airborne recordings of these attacks. I hope you can see from the back there, but this is some photography of some of our targets struck. And you're welcome afterwards to come a little closer, should you feel the need. But you will see here there is very obvious damage, and in this position here.
David, can you say what that target is, please?
Yeah, that's the Belgrade facility. It's an SA-6 site, supporting facility. I'm afraid my pronunciation will probably not be perfect. This is the Novi Sad heliport and vehicle storage depot, and once again you will see very obvious signs of target damage. And this was the Kosovo early warning site. Batyanica aviation repair facility, and once again, very obvious signs of damage. And finally, similarly, another aim point on the same facility. You can see obvious damage where target has been struck. What I'd like to do now is just to dim the lights and give you a chance, if our facilities work, to show you what the crews are looking at from the cockpit.
Go ahead.
Right, we can roll it when you are able. You can see there is the graticule that's on the target, and there you can see where the explosion has occurred.
Sorry, David, can you move back just a second? That's it.
Now, this is an ammunition facility, and you can tell by the veracity of the fire that's coming out that there has definitely been a fair amount of explosive in there. Once again, you can see the graticle on the target. It's very easy for us sitting in this room, but bear in mind these attacks have been carried out at night and in hostile territory. There's some very steady hands there putting the aim points on. Once again. You will obviously realize that the imagery that you're seeing is not as good as it can be viewed through close-up proper instruments. Last night our attacks were carried out with no apparent fighter opposition, and although some surface-to-air missile systems were detected, only one possible launch was noted, with no success. Perhaps that goes some way to demonstrate the effectiveness of our campaign against this highly sophisticated, integrated air defense system. I can give you a small update from Night 1. Whilst I am obviously unable to give you the tactical details, I can confirm that 3 MiG-29 Fulcrums were shot down, 1 over Kosovo and 2 over the Central Federal Republic. 1 up there, 1 there, and 1 here. In summary, our operations continue, and you can expect us to maintain our careful and systematic campaign to interdict, disrupt, and to neutralize the Federal Republic of Yugoslavia's integrated air defense systems. We will achieve this with the minimum of effort necessary and with as little collateral damage to the civilian population and property as possible.
Love you too, Mom.
All right.
Don't forget to write.
As
Alethea hugs her sailor husband and his friend, she tries not to think about what lies ahead.
I'm very weak as far as seeing him leaving, you know. So I'm doing good right now, but as soon as I turn my back, you know, but I had to be strong for him because he's scared too, so.
The families have been watching the news with keen interest the last few days as they prepared to say goodbye.
Every day, just watch what's going on. It's a concern for everybody. You want to keep it, I guess, isolated right there in Yugoslavia. It goes outside that. Who knows where to go?
And who knows where these ships will go? The captain of the Theodore Roosevelt, in charge of 5,000 men and women, claims he doesn't know, though he concedes the Adriatic Sea and the conflict in Yugoslavia are possible.
This is what everybody trains for. This is what people are in the military for. And when we go out there, that's that edge of excitement is there.
Even the admiral of the battle group says nothing's decided, though he says some hostile action is likely.
You want to train for the hardest fight. You want to train for Sunday's game against the toughest team you've got. And I think that's a good game plan. And I tell the air crews and I tell the folks on these ships to get ready to go fight the toughest fight.
That's what the sailors on board have been told. That's why the families left behind are afraid. Brian Cabell, CNN, Norfolk, Virginia.
Here, the Theodore Roosevelt aircraft carrier and its hugely powerful supporting battle group is leaving Virginia for the region. At this stage, it may just assist. But as the president holds continuous discussions with his security advisors, it's clear the administration feels his message must go around the world, in particular to Yugoslavia.
Third day of airstrikes on Yugoslavia. Despite politicians' insistence that the alliance's unity is rock solid, the Prime Minister of Italy, NATO's air base for now and in missile range of Yugoslavia, made plain he wants to see it over with.
I believe the scenario is starting to emerge, which should lead back to a political initiative.
In Rome, demonstrations at the United States Embassy.
This war is in the heart of Europe. We don't think that the war is the solution.
Misgivings from the Greek foreign minister.
We were hoping that all peaceful means could be used to finally come to a peaceful solution. And we think it's a blow back for our region.
In Britain, lawmakers wanted the government to reassure them it has a plan for what happens when the bombing stops. NATO's 19 democracies, some uncomfortably close to the action, naturally have different views of war in the Balkans.
It's a question of time now. Is Belgrade going to move politically, or are we going to have night after night of bombing when certain NATO members will find it hard to have the political stamina to see this through?
Meanwhile, can Yugoslav President Slobodan Milosevic survive night after night?
He's being defiant at the moment because that's what he perceives as being in his interests, and it serves his purposes to be bombed.
A nationalist boost to the president's sagging popularity. An opportunity to brush aside or crack down on opponents.
There is the danger that while the West may achieve its strategic goals, if it does bomb Milosevic into submission, it will strengthen Milosevic and turn Serbia into, as far as democracy is concerned, a black hole into which no light penetrates.
And when, finally, it is all over, some Europeans are asking, who's going to be asked to pay for rebuilding Yugoslavia? Richard Blystone, CNN London.
And high-performance MiG-29s. They will be treated with respect by NATO pilots. Some Serb anti-aircraft missile systems have a reach of 60,000 feet. Even if all the radar and missile sites are destroyed, the skies will not be safe. The Serbs have nearly 2,000 anti-aircraft guns. Many are mobile. And a naval fleet of 4 submarines and frigates. The Yugoslav Armed Forces has nearly 114,000 men, backed by 100,000 reserves. The toughest challenge will be if the Serbs don't bow to airstrikes and force the alliance into a ground operation in Kosovo to establish a NATO wall of protection. NATO currently has around 28,000 troops on the ground in Macedonia. As bomb damage assessment experts continue to study the success rate of Allied air attacks, it's hoped the next move will be from Milosevic and that it'll be a peaceful one. Chris Rogers, Sky News.
Satisfied with last night's raids and said there were no Allied casualties. Reports from the Yugoslav side say more than 100 civilians and 30 soldiers have been killed. Our correspondent Julian Mannion is in Belgrade, where Western journalists aren't permitted to take their own pictures of the bomb damage. He's been watching Yugoslav TV pictures.
In the town of Leskovac, 200 miles south of Belgrade, some of the aftermath of a raid by RAF Harriers. Serbian television showed pictures of damage to a civilian area caused, it claimed, by a bomb which missed its target. The RAF says it hit a military ammunition dump near the edge of town with 2 laser-guided bombs, and that the raid was a complete success. Targets all over Serbia have once again been attacked. This morning, flames and smoke were still billowing near the town of Kraljevo, south of the capital. Last night, NATO aircraft were seen in the skies above the town. Their targets included a military airbase and an important Air Force radar system. The town also has a military factory producing parts for tanks and armored cars, but it's not yet clear from the pictures shown by Serbian television whether that was hit. Other airstrikes struck the neighboring Republic of Montenegro, which along with Serbia makes up what remains of Yugoslavia. In the Belgrade area, the pattern was repeated, with another cruise missile attack on the Air Force base 15 miles away. And this evening, there are reports of a fresh bombing strike just outside the Serbian capital.
In spite of the tension caused by airstrikes just beyond the city limits, there's no sign so far that the NATO campaign is weakening resolve here in the Serbian capital. In fact, attitudes among ordinary people seem to be hardening, with many saying that Serbia should now stand firm against what they see as blackmail. So whatever the damage to President Milosevic's armed forces, and that is no doubt considerable, the uncomfortable fact is that here inside Serbia, his political position has for the moment strengthened.
It's not yet known what price is being paid by the Yugoslav army. One report speaks of 30 servicemen dead, and television showed one of the wounded being treated. What is clear is that the pressure, and presumably the casualties, will have to considerably increase before President Milosevic changes course. Julian Mannion, ITN, Belgrade.
Julian Mannion joins us now on the telephone from Belgrade. Julian, what's the latest there?
Well, we've just been told by the emergency services here that there is an unconfirmed report of an explosion somewhere on the southern fringes of the city. And as I say, it's unconfirmed, and I've done my best to look in that direction. from this hotel, but there's no sign of any fire or any smoke in that direction. What there is as night falls here is an increased sense of nervousness, even fear. The streets are now largely deserted at this time. The street lights have been turned. People have gone home. Fewer shops are open than there were in the past during the daytime, and virtually none are open now. And people are just sitting at home waiting to see what happens. And there really is a considerable worry, of course, among ordinary people in case a missile or a bomb does strike in the heart of the city.
That aircraft was shot down over Bosnia, which is an interesting point we'll pick up in a second, and that the two pilots were now in NATO detention, according to a NATO spokesman in Brussels. Two Yugoslav Air Force MiG-29s shot down over Bosnia during an apparent attempt to fire on NATO ground forces there. So, Francis, if that NATO report firms up, then it does look like the first sign of serious retaliation.
And also the first sign of serious spreading of the war zone, rather than it being in Yugoslavia itself, the various provinces, Montenegro, Kosovo, Serbia, undertaking this in Bosnia. That is a pretty serious action. And I think the other point is if it does turn out they've lost two MiG-29s, and on the first night of the war they lost three, possibly on the second night lost another, at the best estimate of the MiG-29 strength, and the MiG-29 is the best aircraft they've got, upper estimates are about 27. Well, they've lost sort of 6 or 7 now, which is a pretty bad loss.
So, yeah, 20% almost of...
And if they keep on using them in this way, they're going to be losing 1 or 2 a night, and they will lose their best aircraft in probably about another 5 days.
And, I mean, diminish their defence capability quite considerably, presumably?
In terms of air-to-air, because the other aircraft they've got, especially the MiG-21, this is an aircraft whose design heritage goes back to the mid-late 1950s, to say that if they send those up against NATO aircraft, it's going to be like shooting fish in a barrel, actually overestimates the capabilities of the MiG-21.
It might be useful to remind us, as it appears that this is, according to NATO, an attack on NATO ground force, it might be useful for you to just remind us what NATO ground strength there is in the region, because there's quite considerable numbers. I don't know whether we've got a map that you can point it out on. We can have a look in a minute.
If we think of Bosnia and the ongoing stabilisation force there, which is basically NATO run and operated, minimum of about 24,000 troops. From memory, about 16 nations. Britain has a brigade there, the Americans have a brigade, the French have a brigade. It's a sizable force, and if the Yugoslavs wanted to perhaps use the Bosnian Serbs as a proxy or introduce their own ground forces in theatre, they would be making a serious mistake. They would not end up the winners there. They could create some problems, but they would not, as it were, win. It looks like a high-risk strategy. Let us now wait and see what happens over Macedonia. We know there are 12,000 NATO troops there already. Will they now start trying to target them?